Ready to level up your leadership game? Today, we're doing a deep dive into Brené Brown's Dare to Lead.
Hmm.
We're talking about being better leaders, and her work is all about, well, building courage through vulnerability. Kind of surprising, right? We'll unpack that link, get into those tough conversations everyone seems to dread but are so important. And we'll equip you with practical tools like, oh, what's it called? The Braving Inventory for Building Trust. Get ready to take some notes because this is going to be really interesting. To help us understand, I've got an expert guide with us. So, what's the big takeaway from Brown's research, especially for someone driven to lead?
Brené Brown has spent over 20 years studying courage and vulnerability. In Dare to Lead, she interviewed leaders from all walks of life. You know what she found? The common desire. Everyone wants braver leaders and a bolder, more courageous workplace culture. But here's the thing, very few could actually say what that looks like. Imagine this. Brown discovered that courage isn't something you're just born with. It's a skill you can learn and measure, just like learning a musical instrument.
Yeah.
This means you, yes, why you, can become a braver leader.
That changes everything. It challenges the whole idea of natural-born leaders.
Hmm.
And since we're talking about things we can learn, let's talk about vulnerability. I know that word makes some people cringe. What comes to mind when you hear vulnerability? Probably not the first thing you think of with strong leadership. But Brown has a different take. She defines it as having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. Think about that for a second. Vulnerability is about being brave enough to be seen, even when you're not sure about the result. She even tells this story about asking a group of soldiers to think of just one act of courage that didn't involve vulnerability. And guess what?
What's that?
Not a single one could do it. It really emphasizes that courage and vulnerability are inseparable, two sides of the same coin.
That connection is crucial in leadership. Think about giving and receiving honest feedback at work. It takes real vulnerability on both sides. Brown says it best. It is kind to be clear and unkind to be unclear. We might think we're helping by avoiding tough conversations, but really it just creates more problems down the road. Avoiding issues just leads to resentment, confusion, and it really hurts trust in teams. Brown even shares a story about getting tough feedback from her own team. Early on in her company, they called her out on setting unrealistic deadlines. It wasn't easy to hear, but she was grateful for their honesty and the clarity it gave her.
I bet. It's so easy to get defensive with feedback. Did her team give her tips on how to handle those moments when you're the one receiving feedback?
Absolutely, and they're helpful for you too. First, fight that urge to interrupt, defend yourself, or plan your response. Just listen with an open mind. Really try to understand where the other person is coming from. Second, set boundaries for acceptable behavior, but also allow space for emotions. It's okay for people to feel frustrated or angry as long as it's expressed respectfully. And finally, don't be afraid to call a timeout if things get too heated. Sometimes stepping away to cool down is the best way to make sure the conversation stays productive.
Those are really good tips, especially that last one about hitting pause when needed, like hitting reset on a conversation going nowhere. I can see myself using those. How about you?
For sure, having those tools can make all the difference.
Yeah, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the importance of values. Brown uses this great metaphor of an arena where leadership happens. And let's be real, we've all been in that arena. You know, those moments when you're overwhelmed, pulled in every direction, and ready to give up. It's in those moments when you're down in the dirt that your values are your guiding light. They're what keep you going. Brown suggests a simple but powerful exercise to find your core values. Start by listing all the values that resonate with you, then narrow it down to just TDO words that really represent your guiding principles. Those two words are like your compass, helping you navigate tough situations in the arena. She gives her own example, faith and courage. Even something as important as family, she says, is ultimately driven by these core values. They're the force behind her actions and choices.
Building on this idea of values, let's talk about trust. Brown defines trust as choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. It's a two-way street, requiring vulnerability and risk from both sides. To navigate this, Brown gives you a powerful tool, the Braving Inventory. Think of it as a checklist for healthy relationships. It covers boundaries, setting limits respectfully, reliability, showing up consistently, accountability, owning your actions, and more. You can start using this with your team right away.
Okay, this braving inventory, it could be really useful, but it sounds like there's a lot in that acronym. What are the other elements, and how can they help build those strong, trusting relationships, within my team?
You're right, we don't want to just skim over it. Let's break down the rest of Braving. The V, that stands for Vault, meaning you can trust someone to keep things confidential, no gossiping. Then there's I for integrity, meaning they act in line with their values. N is for non-judgment, so you can go to them for help without feeling judged. And finally, G for generosity, assuming the best in others.
I love how each of those is something you can actually do. It's not about vague feelings, it's about specific behaviors that build that trust. So we've covered vulnerability, honest feedback, values, and building trust using braving. Let's move on to something many leaders, even the successful ones, struggle with: failure. It's like nobody's perfect, but that fear of making a mistake, it really holds people back. It can even stop innovation and creativity.
You're right. And Brené Brown, she uses this great analogy. She compares teaching resilience skills after a setback to, well, teaching someone how to land a parachute after they've already hit the ground.
Ouch. That's a really clear picture, but it sounds painful.
Yeah.
What's the solution then? How do we, equip ourselves and our teams to deal with failure before it
It's
happens?
about changing our mindset. Instead of seeing failure as something shameful, we need to see it as a natural part of growing and learning. Like this, every time we stumble is a chance to get back up, dust ourselves off,
Mhm.
and learn something from it.
So important, especially for young people starting out. They might feel like they need to be perfect from day one.
Exactly. We need to create spaces where it's okay to take risks, try new things, and yeah, even fail sometimes. Because it's when we feel like we failed that we often grow the most.
It's like they say, no rainbow without a little rain. Sometimes those tough, messy experiences lead to the best results. Okay, so if we're going to embrace those learning opportunities, maybe that's a better way to think about failures. How do we tell the difference between healthy striving and that toxic perfectionism that keeps us stuck? They can seem similar.
That's a key difference. Healthy striving, it's about pushing ourselves to learn and grow, always trying to improve. It's about the journey, not just the end goal. Perfectionism, on the other hand, that's driven by fear. It's this belief that we are what we achieve.
So with healthy striving, it's about the process, the effort, the learning. Not that idea of being perfect, which is impossible anyway.
Exactly. Think about the impact on a team. Imagine someone driven by healthy striving. They're open to feedback, they'll collaborate, and they don't fall apart when things aren't perfect. Now, someone trapped in perfectionism, they're terrified of messing up, they might not share information, and they struggle to celebrate wins because it's never enough.
Wow, that's a big difference. It shows why it's so important to debunk that myth of perfectionism. It's not about accepting mediocrity. It's about making a way for growth and new ideas.
Exactly. And it's realizing that our imperfections, they make us human. They make it easier to relate to us, and they help us connect with others more deeply.
It's about embracing being a work in progress. Always learning, always growing, always trying to be a little braver.
Couldn't have said it better.
So we've covered a lot: vulnerability, the importance of embracing those so-called failures. It's clear Brené Brown's Dare to Lead has a lot of great advice for anyone wanting to be a more courageous and effective leader. But let's pause for a second and think about everything we've discussed. What really speaks to you? What feels like a light bulb moment? And how can you use these ideas in your own journey as a leader starting today?
That's a really good question to consider. One of the most important things to remember is that becoming a more courageous leader, it's a journey. It's not about suddenly being fearless. It's about creating daily habits and practices that help us be more authentic, build trust with our teams, and face challenges with resilience and heart.
It's like we're building up this courage muscle, right? The more we use it, it gets stronger.
You got it.
Mm.
And a really powerful way to strengthen that muscle is by, practicing gratitude for the courage you already have.
Oh, I like that. It's like giving ourselves a pat on the back for the times we went outside our comfort zone, even if it felt scary.
Exactly. Think back on your own journey for a sec. When have you been vulnerable? When have you spoken up, even if your voice shook a bit? Those are wins.
It's true. It's so easy to get caught up in chasing the next goal that we forget to appreciate how far we've already come.
Right. Celebrating those little victories along the way, that's important. It reinforces our courage, reminds us we can do even more.
And celebrating those wins doesn't have to be this big thing. Just take a quiet moment to reflect, maybe jot down your thoughts, or even just share it with a friend.
Exactly. Acknowledge and honor your journey. And remember, vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the starting point for courage, for innovation, for real connection.
I love that. Real strength comes from embracing all of ourselves, even the messy parts.
And when we lead from that place, when we're brave enough to be vulnerable, it inspires others to do the same.
It's about building a world where leadership isn't about ego. It's about empathy, being real, and a commitment to being our best, even when it's tough.
Well said. A world where everyone feels empowered to lead, to share their talents, and make a difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dare to Lead, we want to leave you with this. You already have the seeds of courageous leadership inside you. Nurture them, be kind to yourself, and watch them grow. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into Brené Brown's work. Keep daring greatly.